Hello and welcome to day 3, frequency and period. Frequency and period are two very important terms, and they need to be memorized, and their definitions need to be memorized. So we've talked about period already. Period is the space needed to see one complete curve. So in this, one complete curve is a quarter, 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 quarter. So the period is 0 to 2 pi. That's going to change depending upon the frequency of the wave. Sometimes the frequency is faster and you're going to see more complete curves. Sometimes it's slower and you'll see less complete curves. So far, you've only seen the standard 0 to 2 pi. So this is something new, and you're going to have to calculate it. The way to calculate it is a formula, 2 pi over b, and that you're going to have to memorize. Okay? Now, every time we've been graphing for the last 2 days, we've done a max, middle, and min at every one of these vertical lines that I kept telling you were called the tick marks. Those tick marks are based on the scale. So now if we're going to speed this up and have more waves, we're going to have to change this scale because the vertical lines to do my max, middle, and min are going to be tighter. So that means we need another formula. The scale formula is simply p, the period, divided by 4. Why is it divided by 4? Because we have 4 quarters to make a complete curve. Okay? So these are two formulas that you must memorize in order to do these graphs if you're not going to just copy them off of the calculator. Okay? So understand that definition for period and get those two formulas memorized, okay? Frequency is your letter B in the formula. Frequency is the number of complete curves, and that is always from 0 to 2 pi, okay? So frequency is always calculated by counting the number of complete curves that you see from 0 to 2 pi. So right here, I see a quarter, 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 quarter. That means I see one complete curve to get to 2 pi. So that means my B value would have been 1. If you notice, the B value in this problem has changed to 2. And if you don't recognize that as B, you need to remember what the original formula was. It was a positive, negative. That only tells me whether something flips. Then the A value, which is that height of the graph. Then either sine, cosine, or tangent. And then immediately your parenthesis pops up, right? That next letter would be B. Then X. Now, in our formula, we keep a parenthesis here because there's sometimes a shift, horizontal shift, okay? So this right here is what we're going to be looking at today. Yesterday, we looked at D, which was your midline. And if you remember those two formulas that we did yesterday, I'll put them up here because they are important formulas. To calculate D, which is your midline, you took the average. The average was max plus min divided by 2. To find the amplitude, that height, you did max minus min divided by 2. So those are two other formulas, okay, that you need to make sure that you know, which means maybe start writing it on Post-it notes and put it around your room so that you see it every time you plug your phone in. You've heard me talk about this before. Okay, when you plug your phone in, when you brush your teeth, put it wherever you're going to see each day. Okay? All right, so let's do this problem. This right here is our A value. So our A value is 3. That means the height of my graph is 3. The B value, that's the new thing today, is 2. That means I'm going to see 2 complete curves from 0 to 2 pi. Well, 0 to 2 pi, I only see 1. That means I need to squish this and get 2 in, which means my scale is going to change. So the next thing you do after this is you calculate P and S. P, we said over here, is 2 pi over B. So 2 pi over 2, B is 2, equals pi. That means pi is the space I need to actually see 1. So instead of seeing 1 to 2 pi, I need to cut this in half to pi. And I should be able to see 1 complete curve in this little space, which means my scale has to change. Scale formula is P over 4. So P is pi, and I need to divide that by 4. So if you come over here, you have pi being divided by 2. I need pi over 4. So to get to pi, I need to start counting. 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and 4 pi over 4, which is pi. Keep going. 5 pi over 4, 6 pi over 4, which is 3 pi over 2, 7 pi over 4, then 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. So you're at the end, you're done. But that means that every max, middle, min is no longer happening at these vertical lines. It's going to happen at new, smaller vertical tick marks. Okay? So with cosine, cosine always starts at the max. My max is 3. So I'm going to start it at 3. But then instead of going to the middle here, I need to go to the middle at this tick mark. My next tick was 2 pi over 4. That should be my min. My next tick is 3 pi over 4. My next tick is 4 pi over 4 max. Next tick middle. Next tick min. Next tick middle. Next tick max. So if you notice, this is all of a sudden giving me 1 complete curve in the space of just 4 pi over 4, which is pi. Okay, that's why the period is pi. So if I keep going, you see 2 complete curves by the time you got to 2 pi. Do you now understand why the B value was 2? Okay, so how many full cycles or periods of this function now fit? 2. And that's because B was 2. Okay, so 1 cosine curve now changed to 2. And of course that would follow along on the left side. I'm not concerned with the left side. I want you getting this down pat. Okay, so use your calculator to sketch half pi. Pause the video. You can put it into the calculator on your computer and see what happens. Okay, hopefully you did do that. You paused it and you checked that out so that you got the practice. But B is 1/2. That means P is going to be 2 pi divided by 1/2. And you should know that that means instead of dividing by 1/2, we times by 2, the reciprocal, which gives me 4 pi. That means I'm going to need the space from 0 to 4 pi in order to see 1 complete curve. So my scale is 4 pi, which is P, divided by 4, which reduces to pi. So if you did this on your calculator, you would have had a max here, a middle here, a minimum here at 2 pi. That means that this would have just been 1/4 and another quarter. So what you saw was just half of a complete curve to 2 pi, which means if I needed to keep going to get the rest of it, I would have had to have gone all the way to 4 pi. That's what these mean. Okay, so the scale was pi, so max, pi is my first tick, 2 pi is my second tick, 3 pi would be my next tick, 4 pi would be my fourth tick for the fourth piece of that curve. So how many complete cycles or periods we're now fitting? Only a half, because that's what B is. Okay? So I took this very slow so you could understand the basics of that. We'll do more of that in class tomorrow. Now let's get into this. This is just straight calculations every time. So I went back over the definitions so you can read this section. I'm not going to read it to you now. When you're done, hopefully you will read it. So looking at this, it's asking you to consider all of this and state the frequency and period. So A is 3. The frequency is whatever's right in front of B. Right in front of X. There's nothing there, so it's a 1. So period is 2 pi over B, which is 1, which means 2 pi. Scale is period 2 pi over 4. So that's pi over 2. So these are the type that we've been doing for the last 2 days, and that's why our scale was always pi over 2. You didn't know why, I just told you it, okay? Same with this video. The whole packet has been at pi over 2. It's been done for you every time. That's the reason why. Okay, so this one, the A value is 3, but this time the B was 2. So the period is always 2 pi over B. B is 2. That gave us pi. Scale is always period, which is pi, divided by 4. So this is the new scale. Shrunk it. That shrunk, it's smaller, which was why you were able to fit more. A is still 3. B is this value, 1/2. So, like I showed you before, it's 2 pi over 1/2, which is really 2 pi times the reciprocal is 2, giving us 4 pi. 4 pi is the period. Scale gets period divided by 4 because of the 4 quarters. That gives me pi. So now pi is bigger than the half pi you've been doing for 2 days. So if the tick marks get bigger, you're going to see less. That's why we're only seeing a half. Okay? So let's move to the back page. Okay? There's that formula again that needs to be memorized. You'll see it a couple different ways sometimes in different videos. Okay, so I just showed you that. This is the one I use each time. Okay, so examine the results from exercise 2 that we just did. So what's true about the product of the period and the frequency? So the product, that's why I showed you this other formula. The product is always going to give us 2 pi. Okay, the result equals 2 pi. The period times B is always going to be 2 pi. Okay, they are inversely related. What does that mean? That means as the period gets bigger, okay, that scale is going to get smaller because we're going to see less. So, I'm sorry, I just said that backwards. As the period gets bigger, okay, the scale is going to wind up also getting bigger, which means you're going to see less. So notice here, my period got bigger. It's 4 pi. So the scale is bigger. It's not pi over 2 anymore, but I saw less of a graph. Here, from 2 pi, all of a sudden period got smaller, so did my scale, but I saw more of those. Okay? So as period gets smaller, the frequency gets bigger. As period gets bigger, the frequency gets smaller. That's an inverse relationship. Okay? So now we have more practice just getting our period each time. So right here, if B is equal to 4, then period is equal to 2 pi over 4, giving me period over 2. This is small, that's big. Okay, remember it used to be 1, that's why I say it's big. Okay, so B is equal to pi over 3. Period is equal to 2 pi